We're talking about the next horizon in executive performance or in performance management. And for those of you who've known me long enough, you've known for me to commonly say, oh man, I got in trouble actually last week. I was in Abu Dhabi. I was leading a government leadership day, and there was, I think, 16 or 17 of this government entity's top leaders, and I won't tell you who it is because I think that would burst the bubble, and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it even. But to be honest, like, it was really fun. We had all these leaders there, and these guys, and all of them were in HR, L&D, and performance management. And so I get up about midway through the day. I've told a bunch of stories. We've talked about leadership. We've engaged on a few really important topics. And then suddenly I stand up and I say, performance management is a myth. And then the director, who is like one of their excellencies, it's one of those people in Abu Dhabi that you say, Your Excellency to, kind of looks at me shocked and like, what are you doing? Like, you're supposed to be on our side here, and performance management is one of the things that we're doing that's like the most important thing. And so I kind of looked at her and I could see she was shocked. And I said, listen, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't freak out, okay? Performance management is a myth. It's a myth that HR professionals have been telling ourselves for the last 20 years to make ourselves feel better about the idea that possibly we could control the output of humans, which, of course, we can't. And so you could see her face just deteriorated, and I was like, okay, you got to give me 5 minutes to explain this. So here's the problem with performance management. Performance management is a set of myths that HR developers or HR professionals developed so that we could convince ourselves that we could control the output of humans, right? I've said that. The problem is that humans have free will, and none of us are victims and none of us are slaves, and most of the time, those humans are not being managed at all. The problem is that 95% of the time when a human is involved in a work experience and they're doing their work or not doing their work, they're not being managed. They're not being monitored. We don't know what they're doing. And so the margin of the company, every company, is actually made in the dark when nobody's looking, when nobody is managing performance. And real performance from humans is not managed at all. It comes from inside, from within. It's intrinsic. Real performance happens when nobody's looking and the employee or the partner of the organization has access to the resources of the organization, the time, the money, the equipment, whatever the resources are of the organization. They have access to the resources of the organization, and they're deciding whether or not to use those resources for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of themselves, at the expense of the organization, or to not do anything at all. So there's active engagement, passive disengagement, and active disengagement. And that is where real performance management breaks down. Performance management is not really a thing. Performance management is a hope that we can manage performance, when in fact, the reality is that humans manage their own performance, and the best thing that we can do is drive the kinds of behaviors that lead to performance. That's not performance management. That's organizational behavior. Now, that's where I come in. So I'm an organizational behaviorist. For those of you who have not met me before or never taken a webinar with me, I'm really excited to meet you today. Again, my ideal is at the end of this 60 or 90 minutes, you'll have just enough information to improve the quality of your life in one or two small areas. You'll be able to make a decision differently or exhibit a different behavior than you've had before. And that's going to drive up the quality of your life just a little bit, and just enough for you to say, hey, I wonder how I can engage more with this Dr. Corrie guy. He seems kind of cool. I think maybe I'm going to follow him on Instagram or invite him to talk to our executive committee, or I think maybe I'm interested in some coaching, or at least maybe I'll buy his book, okay? So that's why I'm here. That's why you're here. I want to see if this relationship works. And if I'm able to improve the quality of your life a little bit, then maybe we can deepen the quality of our relationship, all right? So that's it. But look, performance management, like I said, is a myth. Nobody can manage performance. People manage their own performance. And you know what I noticed is that it's not just true at the lower levels, the execution levels in an organization, or at the mid-management or senior management levels, but way up at the top. All the way up at the top, people manage their own performance, and there is a massive, massive gap in performance quality, even at the very top of the organization. Now, I have been involved over the last 25 years. I've been involved in business strategy, leadership development, and organizational behavior initiatives in more than 150 different companies in more than 30 different countries, including the World Bank and Microsoft. So those are some of my clients. I've worked with a number of major multinationals in organizational behavior and leadership development. And you know what I've noticed is that there's a huge gap at the very top. Not all CEOs are great leaders, and not all CFOs or COOs are great leaders. And some of you are nodding your heads right now. You're like, oh my goodness, you need to meet my CEO. He's a jerk. Okay, so I know those jerks. And I know that because I'm an executive coach. So over the last 2.5 decades, I've met so many executives in those very high level positions. And I remember as a young executive coach, you know, like in my early 30s, thinking, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to start coaching these guys and they're going to be like, see, it's going to be really good. And I would get into these rooms with these executive committee members as their coach and think, wow, how did you get this job? Like seriously, like it's just mind-boggling to me the amount of distance there is between really, really good executives and really, really terrible executives. And the role, the title, whatever's written on the business card or on the plaque on the desk or on the name tag on the door doesn't seem to matter. So what actually matters? That's the question. Where is real performance at a high executive level? That was the question that I was asking myself about a decade ago when I really ran into this dichotomy. And I'll tell you what, I've had amazing CEOs as coaching clients. I've had really terrible CEOs as coaching clients. Like I said, the title doesn't seem to matter from one to the other. It's a set of behaviors. And so I started to ask myself, what are the set of behaviors that really set these two categories of people apart, being that a person in either of those categories can actually get that job. So I started to ask that question. I did a bunch of research, and by a bunch of research, I mean, I was reading and writing and monitoring my clients for about a decade without them really knowing what I was doing. And what I was doing in the background was I was writing this. This is my book, Spartan CEO, and it is the thesis behind everything we're going to discuss today. I'm going to introduce to you a couple of the major topics in this book. This is the 6 pillars of executive performance. So as we talk today about performance management, the way we're going to address it is through the 6 pillars of executive performance, and those are the differentiators that I've identified over the last 10 years of research and 2 years of writing that set amazing quality CEOs apart from really terrible quality CEOs and other executives. And we're going to discuss, oh, by the way, before I start, yes, I always forget to remind people, please connect with me on social media, even if you don't like my webinar. If you don't like my webinar and you don't want to buy my book, that's fine. I encourage you to connect with me on social media because if you're a leader or a manager in any organization, I'm always putting free content out there for you. There's like 1-minute videos that give you one tip or trick in management or leadership or influence that's really going to help to accelerate your career. It's all free. I put it out there every day. You never have to DM me. You never have to like or comment on any of the content. Just take it, apply it to your life, and you will see the quality of your career trajectory improve, okay? So connect with me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or through my website at drcorrieblock.com. And of course, all the information you need about my book and everything else is there. Plus, I have another book coming out, which I should also introduce you to. I don't have a copy of the cover because it hasn't been designed yet, but the book itself is already written and it's in editing. It's called Business is Personal. And again, it's based on about 15 years worth of experience and research on what drives employee motivation and engagement. And I've actually executed the training program that the book is based on more than 100 times, and I mean in more than 100 different organizations. And it's been really, really phenomenal to see people connect with their work and find meaning in their work and have that sense of meaning and purpose really elevate the quality of their lives. Because like I always say, if you've heard me before, we're spending half of our lives at work, you guys. We deserve for it to be a meaningful half. So I really hate those people who say work-life balance and they're trying to find work-life balance. There's no such thing as work-life balance. That's another myth that we tell ourselves. That's a myth that HR professionals say to each other to encourage each other to think of our work as other than our life. There's no such thing as anything other than your life. There's just your life. And so work is a really large part of that. And like if you look at the span of your entire human life, probably half or more of all of your human experiences will be gathered at work, and therefore it should be a meaningful half. So business is personal is all about the meaningfulness of work and the meaningfulness of your half of your life that you spend at work. And that's coming probably April or May. And if you're on my mailing list, I will make sure that you know when that's out and available on Amazon. So let's talk about these 6 pillars of executive performance. We're going to go through them one by one. We're going to talk about fitness first, then we're going to talk about confidence, discipline, connecting, rest, and competition, okay? Does it matter on the bottom line of an organization if the CEO is fit? I've seen some really unfit CEOs. Obviously, here in Dubai, there's a lot of really unfit CEOs. So it became important to me when we're talking about coaching from a whole life perspective. When my CEO clients are asking me, hey, should I actually exercise? Should I go to the gym? I wanted to answer them not just for their own health benefit, but also for the benefit of their entire economic community. Does it matter if a CEO is physically fit? Actually, yeah. As it turns out, it makes a huge difference. And so I did the research on this, and I found 2 separate research studies that covered the same group of companies over the same period of time. Okay, it was the S&P 1500. So if you don't know, the S&P 1500, Standard & Poor's, is like the top 1,500 companies in the United States. And over a period of a decade worth of data. And what these 2 independent, different studies studied was, the first one studied the impact of a CEO's golf habits on the bottom line of the organization, and the other one studied the impact of a CEO's running habits on the bottom line of the organization. So the one was studying whether or not golf, if you played a lot of golf, does it impact the bottom line of the company, and by how much and in which direction, right? And my instinct would be to say, you know what? A lot of the really wealthy and successful CEOs that I know out in the market, they play golf. I mean, we're in Dubai, right? I live in Jumeirah Golf Estates. I live right next to a golf course. Now, I don't play golf, but I live next to a golf course. There's a lot of golf courses here. And so you'd think the really powerful, really successful CEOs play golf, and so that golf would be positively associated with bottom line profit in an organization. Makes sense to me, right? But I would be wrong. Because actually what the studies showed was that over those 10 years, the CEOs who played the most amount of golf were associated with the worst firm performance. And it was actually the opposite when we looked at the other study of the same Standard & Poor's 1500 and the same decade of data, when they looked at CEOs who had run a marathon in the last year, and that's how they defined fitness, right? One of them said those who play golf, and the other one said those who can run a marathon. Now, which I find really interesting because both of those activities take 4 hours. It takes 4 hours to run a marathon. I mean, I can't run a marathon in 4 hours, but generally speaking, it takes about 4 hours. And it takes 4 hours to play a good round of golf, more or less. You know what I'm saying? So it's not the amount of time that a CEO is investing in a sport, and it's not whether or not they're a sportsman, because both a runner and a golfer would be considered sportsmen. So they're both putting in 4 hours, they're both considered sportsmen, and yet golfing is associated with poorer firm performance, and running, as you would have guessed, is associated with higher firm performance. Actually, firms where CEOs are avid runners, they tend to perform higher than the average. And firms where CEOs are avid golfers, they tend to perform worse than the average. And these are the actual numbers. Okay, so when we're looking at the market to asset ratio, so the market value of the company to the asset of the asset value of the company, the average, as you'll see there in the middle, is 1.7 to 1. So in general, what that means is that if a company in that S&P 1500 over that period of a decade is worth $1 billion on paper, right? It's got $1 billion in assets, then the market value of that company's shares on average should be $1.7 billion. That was the average. The market value over the asset value is 1.7 to 1. What we found is that golfing CEOs average about 1.53 to 1, so a little lower than the average, and running CEOs average at about 2.5 to 1, which is a massive gap. And if you had that $1 billion company, $1 billion in assets, if your CEO was a golfer, you would be worth about $1.53 billion in the market. But if your CEO was a runner, you'd be worth $2.5 billion in the market, which is an $800 million gap between runners and golfers. And that's one person in one position, and that's not even the fact that they're sportsmen, that's the kind of sport they play that's making that massive difference. And that's over 1,500 organizations over a decade in both studies, which I find amazing, right? Because if I'm going to study leadership, I want to know what actually makes a difference. I don't want to know what theories people have about how they can engage with people and how they can communicate better. I want to know what kinds of engagement, what kinds of communication actually make a difference. And it's the same thing with fitness. I found over those 10 years of study that those CEOs that were physically fit, and not just sportsmen, but a kind of sport, the kind of sport that requires endurance, intensity, those kinds of CEOs are actually associated with higher firm performance. And it was my experience as well. When I look back at my body of executive coaching clients, I could see that it was amazing. These CEOs who were intensely fit and could run marathons, they performed better. They made more money. They were better performing organizations because they modeled that same fitness for their people. It became a part of the culture. It was kind of expected. They were more likely to subsidize fitness as an expense or a benefit in the HR department, so people could join gyms, or they would have a gym in the office, things like that. And that's what I think is making the big difference. Is it's not that they're doing a sport, it's the kind of sport that they're doing. And those who can run a marathon, which is the subject of the study, they tend to have the emotional endurance to sit through 4 or 6 or even 8 hours of negotiations if it's necessary. They can simply outlast their opponent because they've developed the mental discipline to do just one thing for at least 4 hours without stopping, without walking. And it's hard. It's hard. I noticed for myself that when I started to become a lot more physically fit a few years ago, I started running obstacle course races and I started doing CrossFit. And CrossFit and obstacle course races are very high intensity. They require a lot of energy and a lot of focus. And I noticed that my output in every area of my life started to go up. So my challenge to you is, if you want a higher paying job and if you want a shot at those executive positions that you haven't had a shot at before, maybe start with your waistline. Sorry, that's not PC, but that's the science. And I've been saying it for years. If you want to learn leadership, I can teach you, but don't follow me. Follow the science. I'll teach you the science of what actual leadership is. And actual leadership pays attention to physical fitness. The other thing that I was thinking of is, at the same time, there's 3 different kinds of fitness that leaders pay attention to. Not just physical fitness, but also mental fitness and organizational fitness. And mental fitness I won't deal with here because we don't have a lot of time. But organizational fitness, I started to think, you know what is the difference between weight loss and real fitness in an organization? And we had a great opportunity to see what weight loss looks like in organizations all over the world during 2020. When we watched COVID take down a number of really large industries and major companies, we saw people kicked out of their jobs left, right, and center. And that's how companies have traditionally lost weight, is that they've cut people. And the problem with that is that there's an actual real human cost to that. It's not just a cost you cut on your labor line so you can save money on the net profit line at the end of the year, but it's people losing their jobs. And like I said, your job is half of your life. So it's people being cut out of the economic communities that are supporting them, their families, their children, their parents. And it's absolutely vile. It's a horrible experience. I understand that to save the ship, you might need to lose some people. But the way that organizations were going about it in 2020, I have really great examples of amazing organizations that were managing that cut very well. And I have great examples of really terrible organizations that were managing that cut very, very poorly. What we do need to know is that whether you manage the cut well or manage the cut poorly, there are 2 separate studies that indicate what the actual human cost is. And I don't just mean in money, I mean in lives. This is the reality, that for every 234 employees that lose their jobs involuntarily, one of them will die as a direct result of it. And these 2 studies both upheld exactly the same findings in Sweden and in the United States. So we have socialist and capitalist governments, both first world, so that there's a lot of support, there's a lot of welfare around to minimize the damage. And yet even in those places, and even controlled for things like previous existing mental conditions, alcoholism, or other addictions, when the studies were both controlled for all of those different inputs, they ended up with the same input, that your hazard of death goes up by about 16.5% over the subsequent 2 years from losing your job involuntarily. And that, for me, highlights the importance of making sure that we are treating our employees like humans and not resources. And that's another great big difference between high-performing executives and mediocre or low-performing executives, is how they treat their employees. So you'll know the difference. You know there's leaders in your organization that treat their people and like family at best, or at least like humans at worst, right? And then there's other leaders in your organization or in other organizations that you've experienced that treat their people like resources. And I hate those terms, human resources and human capital. I think we need to get rid of them. They are terrible terms, and they really highlight how deeply ingrained this idea of dehumanization of employees has been. And for me, that also really highlights how innovative, not just innovative, but important it is for high-performing leaders to recognize that your treatment of employees and the way that you deal with your humans as not as resources, but as humans, really impacts the bottom line of your organization and the perception of your leadership, the quality of your leadership, and therefore your own performance and the performance of your entire organization. Now, I think by now you can see it just at the end of Pillar 1 here. I mean, this isn't the end of Pillar 1. This is an introduction to just 2 basic concepts in Pillar 1. But you can see how important it is for us as leaders to learn the science behind the behaviors that set great leaders apart from mediocre leaders. I do want to give you an introduction to the other 5 really quickly, and I'm not going to spend as much time there as I did on this one. But this is number 2. Number 2 is confidence. Confidence, by the way, is a skill, not a talent. So I don't know if you've ever heard anyone describe themselves as a generally confident person. Oh yeah, I'm confident. I'm a confident person. You can ask me anything and I'll be fine, But that's actually not true. From a psychological and neurological perspective, there's no such thing as a generally confident human. Yes, it's a skill. In fact, all human confidence is gained through, there's a secret ingredient to confidence. You know what it is? Risk. Yes. All human confidence is gained through risk. You have to take risk and overcome it in order to gain confidence. If there's no risk involved, you will not gain any confidence. And just because you're confident in something doesn't mean that you're good at it, right? There's a difference between confidence and competence. And so you might think that, I'll give you an example. For example, like I can stand on a stage right now and speak to 1,000 different people, and it's no issue for me. No problem. As long as I've got my slides behind me and I've got a microphone, 1,000, 3,000, 10,000 people, not a big deal. I've done it before. But if you take away my microphone and give me a piano, same stage, same people, I am no longer confident. Because all confidence is contextual. All confidence is built through risk, and all confidence is contextual. You have to know something about what you're doing. You have to have the actual competencies required in order to carry out whatever task you're trying to be confident for. And so this is what a confidence map looks like. Real confidence is the ability to accurately describe the distance between your actual ability and your perceived ability, okay? If you can accurately assess your own ability, then your confidence is real. Now, let's take this for an example. You've got the actual ability in the center there. You have perceived ability at the top and perceived ability at the bottom. If you have your actual ability and you perceive your ability to be much higher, like let's say for instance, I'm on that stage, they take away my microphone, and I've got 3,000 people in front of me, suddenly they plunk a piano down in front of me and say, play a concert. If I was to actually sit down and start banging away on the keys thinking that I was a good concert pianist, that's not confidence. That's arrogance. When your level of perceived ability is much higher than your level of actual ability, that's arrogance, okay? And the same thing on the low side. If your level of perceived ability is much lower than your level of actual ability, that's cowardice. So if somebody said to me, hey, I want you to pick up a microphone and speak, and I said, no, I can't do it. I can't, that's just cowardice. Because I actually can. My ability level is here. And if I'm assessing my ability level to be down here, that's not true. That's not real. My real ability is here. So leaders struggle with both different kinds of abuses of confidence. One is, the cowardice, or even worse, the false humility, when they say, oh, please do this, and you say, oh, I can't, but you can, that's just pride. That's another kind of arrogance, okay? Because you can. And if you're not accurately assessing your ability, then it's either arrogance or cowardice. Now, something that I want you to see, there's that little yellow window in there called positivity bias. All right? Now, positivity bias is something that humans have developed over 300,000 years of evolution so that we could advance as a culture, as a species, as people. And what it does is it allows us a little window of error to think that we can do something that we might not actually be able to do. And that positivity bias is there for a good reason. One, because it's easier to think positively about yourself than to think negatively about yourself. You get more neurochemical rewards for that. And two, it keeps people trying new things, right? It keeps us taking that little bit of risk. And the real thing to notice about this positivity bias is that it's very useful to get you to push just past your actual ability so you can take a risk and then develop the ability that you didn't have before. And that's how leaders develop. They develop by taking a measured risk above their level of ability. So the next time you're faced with a challenge that's above your level of ability, if you assess yourself to be this good when the challenge is here, then you're arrogant. And if you assess yourself to be this good when the challenge is here, then you're a coward. But if you assess yourself to be just below and you still take that shot and you still aim for it, very likely you're going to gain some new skills and some new experiences that will add to your level of confidence and to your level of actual ability. That's how real confidence is made. The third pillar is discipline. And discipline is the ability to choose what you do in spite of how you feel. And I know that many of us these days, we struggle with convenience. We struggle with the neurochemistry of feeling like it or motivation. I think actually in my book, you should read the title for this chapter. I don't think I can say it on a webinar because I'm going to air this later. But yeah, you should read the title for this chapter because motivation isn't really a thing. Motivation, from a human psychological standpoint, it burns out really quickly. Now, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you've been sitting on the couch and you've got motivated. You're like, oh yeah, it's January, I'm going to hit the gym, okay? And you have a report coming up at the end of the week and you need to finish your report and so you think, oh yeah, I'm motivated, I got to finish the report. Do you know how long that motivation lasts? Somewhere between 5 and 40 seconds, depending on the research that you read. So what happens is you get a hit of dopamine. In the striatum of your brain, right up here, if you think about doing something, that is an achievement. You get a little hit of dopamine. Now dopamine, if you've never heard the word before, is an addictive, very highly addictive, very pleasurable neurochemical. It's the best drug on the planet, basically. And you have a machine in your head that produces the best drug on the planet and consumes the best drug on the planet. And you do that all the time when you want to achieve something. So when you're sitting on the couch and you think to yourself, man, I really got to get to the gym, the initial motivation that you have is a hit of dopamine that's produced in the striatum or the ventromedial prefrontal cortex of your brain. That's in the achievement and reward center. And if you actually get up and go to the gym, you'll get another major hit of dopamine from actually achieving what you had set out to achieve. But there's new research. That's not the only place in the brain where dopamine is produced. And I really wish it was, because it would be so much easier to hack our behavior if that was the only place in the brain where dopamine is produced. But we found out in 2019, there was a set of studies that found out that dopamine is also produced in the anterior insula, next to the risk, perception, and emotion centers of the brain. And what that means is, if you're sitting on the couch and you think to yourself, I've really got to get up and go to the gym, you've got between 5 and 40 seconds until that first initial hit of dopamine burns out. When that dopamine burns out, you get a second hit of dopamine from the risk, perception, and emotion center of your brain to reward you for avoiding the risk of going to the gym. Yes, you get an addictive, pleasurable feeling for avoiding the risk of going to the gym or avoiding the risk associated with writing the report. Your brain doesn't see what's going on in the outside world. It just knows, oh, you've got to accomplish this thing. And if you, as a very smart and evolved human being, you decide not to accomplish that thing, then your brain assumes, wow, she must have an amazing reason for that. Good job. Well done you for avoiding the risk of going to the gym. Maybe you would have embarrassed yourself. You might have hurt yourself. You might not have been able to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. Or maybe good job, for avoiding that report. They might have laughed at you. You might have written something wrong. You never know. You could get fired. If you get fired, then you lose your income and your ability to feed your kids and your ability to take care of your parents. So that's a big threat. And your brain's not as our brains are actually much smarter than we are. So your brain is going to reward you for avoiding the risk of doing what you were supposed to do. And so you can learn very quickly that if you feel motivated to do something and then you avoid doing it, you get 2 hits of dopamine, which is incredibly addictive. And you can, over the course of your life, become addicted, literally, chemically, heroin level addicted to not feeling like doing it. Yeah, if you want to learn leadership, don't follow me, follow the science. So discipline, the actual act of discipline, when I teach this to executives all over the world, I teach them this. The actual development of discipline in the brain is the movement of dopamine consumption from the back of your brain to the front of your brain. That is what actual discipline is. Number 4 is connecting. We're going to talk about another neurochemical. This one is my favorite. I think oxytocin is the most profitable chemical in business. And we'll start by giving you a quick understanding of the cocktail, the happiness cocktail. I know that a couple of years ago, happiness at work was a really big thing. And so I wanted to look into what happiness is actually made of, scientifically speaking. And so in the human brain, happiness occurs the same in everybody's brain all at the same it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Every culture, every age, every corner of the planet, every language, every religion, every human on the planet experiences happiness in exactly the same way. It is a combination of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, norepinephrine, and anandamide. That's it. That's your cocktail. Okay? Now, your triggers for happiness will be different from one human to the next human, but the experience of happiness is that chemical cocktail of those 6 major chemicals, okay? And in varying degrees and depending on what it is that's actually going on. Like I said, dopamine is an achievement chemical, or it's a risk aversion chemical. Serotonin is a happiness chemical associated with honor and place in society. Oxytocin is bonding. Oxytocin is the only way that your brain registers trust and belonging. And now you think about how important that is at work. How important is it to connect at work as a leader with the people around you? How important is that? And how important is it for employees to connect with each other and to connect with their work at work? It's unbelievably important. By the way, I'll give you a couple of numbers on this. The Gallup research from 2019 is very clear. It's 20 years of research over like 30,000 different businesses. They've said that oxytocin in the work environment leads to a 21% profitability difference. So those offices that produce a good amount of oxytocin are 21% more profitable than those offices that produce a bad amount of oxytocin. And in fact, 70% of the variance on oxytocin production in employees during work comes down to a single relationship. And do you know which relationship that is? It's the line manager. The relationship between an employee and their direct line manager governs 70% of the oxytocin that employee produces, and therefore governs 70% of that employee's engagement, discretionary effort, the work that happens in the dark when nobody's looking. All of that is governed by that single relationship, or at least to a 70% variance or 70% degree. So really what you want to do is, as a leader, be very active, proactive, intelligent about oxytocin. And you'll know those leaders. I know there's so many that I could, I don't want to name them by name because like I said, I'm going to put this out there. But I know so many leaders who are amazing at getting their work done very, very quickly in the beginning of the week, usually, or at the beginning of the day, and then spending the rest of the day or the remainder of the week just connecting with people. Have you ever seen those executives who seem to have like 30 hours every day? Because they can get all of their work done and they still have time to wander around the office, shake people's hands, ask about their kids, celebrate birthdays, put themselves on social media, all of that stuff. Have you seen those executives? I'll tell you how they create time in a minute. What they're doing in the office is they're creating oxytocin, because oxytocin is human bonding. We produce oxytocin, by the way, within 1/5 of 1 second when we meet someone for the very first time. Long before you're aware of that person, long before you're conscious of that person, your brain has already made 2 decisions. One, is that person a threat? Okay? Your amygdala makes that decision long before you're aware of it. Your amygdala decides, is that person a threat? If that person's not a threat, are they a potential friend? And if they are a potential friend, you get a little hit of oxytocin when you look at that person. And that helps you to determine who it is on the planet that you can trust to provide for you and protect you, and who you can partner with in order to advance in your quality of life. All right? So that's what oxytocin is. 5 very, very quick tips that you can take for developing oxytocin among your team. This works upline and downline. So if you have employees working with you, lateral team members, or you want to engage a little bit more with your manager, your line manager, or your executives, these are the things that work for all humans all of the time. Encouragement is number 1, just words of affirmation. All humans like to know when they're appreciated and when they're making a valuable contribution to the world. Helping behavior has been shown to be not only addictive, but contagious. So a human that sees a human helping another human will also have to help another human in order to repay their debt to society for having witnessed that helping behavior. So just so you know, helping behavior is addictive and contagious. It produces oxytocin, which is also an addictive chemical, and it passes on socially from one human to the next human. Appropriate touch, and I say appropriate because we're talking about a work environment here. Like a little bit of contact. I don't mean you should go out and start hugging people, and especially now with social distancing, I think maybe just back off just a little bit. But humans do like appropriate contact. A little tap on the shoulder, a little touch behind the elbow. Handshakes are an appropriate touch under normal circumstances, like post-COVID. Handshakes are going to be a normal circumstance again. So appropriate touch is important. Gifts, but real gifts, not cheesy presents just for the sake of giving them something, but something that shows that you've thought a little bit about that person. It doesn't have to be expensive. As a matter of fact, the cheaper it is, and the more directed toward their character it is, the more meaningful it will be, and the more value you will create, and the more oxytocin they will produce. Okay, so if you want to produce a high level of oxytocin, choose a gift that's very inexpensive, but very meaningful. Like a card. If you write a card, very cheap, but it's got your words on it, your handwriting, and my handwriting is terrible. But if you write a card with your words on it to encourage somebody and give them that as a gift, that's going to be much more meaningful than a box of chocolates without a label on it, okay? Just another way to hack oxytocin. And the other one is quality time. And I know a lot of executives who use this as a reward for their staff. As a reward for good behavior or for good performance, they'll say, hey, listen, let me take you to lunch. Come up to my office, let's spend 90 minutes together getting to know each other. Do you know what kind of a difference that makes in the life of a medium or a senior level manager for their CEO to say, come and spend 90 minutes with me? That's massive. Because intrinsically we know you're never going to get that 90 minutes back, right? So that's a huge outlay of the life of the CEO to invest in the quality of your life. So you, as a leader or as a manager, you can reward people with quality time by saying, hey, listen, why don't you and I have a one-on-one over coffee today? Why don't you and I just spend a little bit of time getting to know each other? I want to talk to you about things that are not related to work. Okay, so quality time, real gifts, appropriate touch, helping behavior, and encouragement are very easy ways to produce oxytocin among your team. Now let's talk very quickly about rest. Rest is pillar number 5, and it's extremely important for you as a leader or as a manager, if you want to be at your highest performance, if you want to manage your own performance, that you're resting enough. And the adequate amount of rest, generally speaking, is around 7 to 7.5 hours. If you sleep much longer than 8 hours, you're not going to get as much benefit from it. And if you sleep much shorter than 7 hours, then on average, you're going to feel the impacts of that. And by the impacts, I mean, we've also studied that. There's science behind how much rest is enough rest. And on average, after 2 consecutive sub-6 hour nights, the average employee performance will drop by 12.1%, and it will last for 6 days. So in my book, I've actually given you the calculations to figure out how much it would cost your organization if your executive committee member makes X number of dollars a month or X number of dirhams per year. and they have a big weekend out, how much is that going to cost the company on the bottom line? Well, we know. We've got figures for that. And so I make a case in there of actually including a sleep bonus for organizational leaders, especially at the executive class, for wearing a Whoop or some other sleep monitor and reporting their sleep patterns to the organization to make sure that they're actually sleeping enough. Because if you're sleeping enough, your quality of decision making goes up, your input seeking behavior goes up, your connecting goes up. I know we've all had nights where we've not slept very well, and we've all experienced what happens at work the next day, okay? You know, you don't make good decisions. You don't build quality relationships. You're not acting at your best, and therefore you're not acting at the organization's best. And there is a very real bottom line impact to that. So if you're sleeping well, your leadership is going to be good, the quality of your decisions and your your management is going to be good, and you're going to actually just make more money, right? So sleep really well, no nights off. And the last thing I'm going to say about rest is that you need to learn how to use flow. Now, flow this has become such a big thing among my executive coaching clients that I've turned this into an entirely separate program. It's called the Performance Neuroskill. In 2 days, I can teach you flow and mindfulness, and those two go hand in hand. But basically, flow is an active form of rest. And by an active form of rest, I mean your prefrontal cortex, this part here, is shuts down. And then you end up doing all of your work and activity back here in the gray matter of your head, which is much faster and much more powerful. And just to give you an idea of what the experience is like, I don't know if have you ever driven your car and arrived home and not remembered driving? Okay, now keep that in mind. That's a really dangerous thing you just did, okay? You were driving a 2-ton bullet on a highway at 100 kilometers an hour with 1,000 other people driving these 2-ton bullets. And yet you pulled into your driveway, you got out, and you had no memory of actually driving. The question is, were you safe or was it dangerous? Well, of course it was safe. Absolutely it was safe. The reason I know it was safe is because you were doing it in a state of flow. In a state of flow, you get rid of the narratives of time and self and other distractions in your conscious brain or in your aware brain, and you move them back here to make the calculations much faster, much more fluidly, and without as many biases. Lower biases, lower cortisol, lower adrenaline, much more smooth, much safer. I know surgeons who use flow in surgery. I know race car drivers use it all the time in their driving to make sure that they're driving at their absolute best. They shut the prefrontal cortex down. Now, flow is something we've been studying for about 20 years. We've known what it is for about 30. We've studied it really intensely for about 20 years. About 5 years ago, we learned how to artificially trigger a state of flow. And 3 years ago, some of the researchers on the planet, including myself, we started to be able to predictably and consistently be able to help people who've never used it or never triggered it in themselves to reproduce that activity. So like I said, if I was going to tell you how that executive creates time, and this is how they do it. Executives who work in a state of flow are 500% more productive. And so an executive who knows how to use flow can get a week's worth of work done in 1 day and spend the rest of the 4 days doing whatever, playing golf or running or connecting with people. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to learn how to use flow, I've got a little bit of it in my book. I'm writing another book that'll be out in 2022 on the performance neuroskills, one of which is flow. And if you want to learn how to use flow in your own life, join me on a crash course on mindfulness and flow so that you can hack your own brain and become 500% more productive, okay? So we have inactive states of rest, which is sleeping 7.5 hours a night, and active states of rest like mindfulness, flow, meditation, and other things like that. Competition is the last of our 6 pillars. Now, in the competitive field, I think this is a really funny statistic. A goalie has a 33.3% chance of stopping the ball if they just stand still, but they only stand still about 6.5% of the time. Why? Why don't they play the odds? Well, they don't play the odds because there's a bias toward action. We feel like doing something is better than doing nothing. And more often than not, that's true. But in the competitive field, we have to be strategic about what it is that we're actually doing. We can't just compete for the sake of competing or act for the sake of acting. We have to act or we have to compete in a certain direction. And so I want to tell you a really quick story about competitors, Microsoft and Apple, to illustrate the value of choosing your correct competitor and curating that competition. So I don't know how many of you know the story of this. In 1997, Apple Computer Corporation was on the verge of bankruptcy. They were about 3 months away from insolvency. They were freaking out. They spent their last like $400 million buying Next Computers and Steve Jobs, so that Steve Jobs could come back and help save the company, right? Now, it wasn't Steve Jobs that saved the company. It was Fred Anderson. Fred Anderson was the guy that came up with the bubble butt iMac computer, and that's actually what saved the company. And then Steve Jobs and all of his weird and wonderful creations after that helped the company grow into this massive thing. What they don't talk about, and what's really very interesting to me from a competition standpoint, is where they got the money. They were right next to insolvency, right? And yet they had to buy Next Computers. And the money for buying Next Computers, guess where it came from? Bill Gates. It came from Microsoft. Yeah, I kid you not. Go ahead and research it. It's about $150 million that Bill Gates put into Apple. He bought preferred stock in Apple so that Apple had the cash to buy Next Computers and bring Steve Jobs back on board. Why would Bill Gates, as a good, competent leader, leading this organization with their number one competitor on the rope, on the mat, bleeding out, all he had to do was go home and sit around and do nothing, and Apple Computers would disappear? Why would he save them? And if you read the reports from that, if you read the interviews from that time, you'll be very interested to find out that Bill Gates' motivation to save them was so that he would have a competitor. And he said, we're better with Apple in the world. And during his conversation with Steve Jobs said the same thing. The quote is right there on Time magazine from 1997. Steve Jobs thanked Bill Gates for saving Apple. And he said it like this: Bill, thank you. The world's a better place. And it is. It's a better place because Microsoft and Apple are both on the planet. They're both competing. The result of that is innovation goes up. The quality of products and services goes up. The amount of money that both of those companies have made certainly has gone up. And it's a bit like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo competing in football, right? There's Messi and Ronaldo, and then there's number 3 down here. If you have really, really good competition curated for yourself, it doesn't just drive competition, it drives your own personal development as a leader. And so my encouragement to you today is, if you want to apply this lesson as a leader, those leaders that are consistently driving themselves to develop have benchmarks in the market that they've identified. They're competing with someone. Now, it might not be publicly, it might be internally. They've chosen somebody in the market and they've said, yeah, I want that person's job, or yeah, I want that character, I want that ability, I want that. They're chasing somebody, but they're chasing somebody. And that's really set high-performing leaders apart from mediocre performing leaders, is that high-performing leaders always choose benchmarks for themselves in the market, in the industry, and in the world, so that they can drive not competition directly with that leader, but so they can drive their own leadership development through that competition. And remember, competition is something that us as humans, we have 300,000 years of evolutionary momentum in the direction of competition. We know how to do it. We're very good at it. And all I want you to do is direct it toward good. I want you to direct that competition toward a healthy self-development and choose people in the market that you want to benchmark yourself to. That's it. So we're at the end of this is the fastest I think I've ever been able to introduce all 6 pillars of executive performance. And if you want more information about this, the fastest and cheapest way is this. This is Spartan CEO. This is my book. It's available on my website or on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you want to buy it. If you're not a reader and you don't want to read this, or if you want something a little bit deeper, on my website, learn.drcorrieblock.com. Let's put this up here. Go there, learn.drcorrieblock.com, and you will find the 6 pillars of executive performance. I have taken each of those differentiating leadership pillars and turned them into a masterclass. So yes, fitness, confidence, discipline, connecting, rest, and competition are each their own individual masterclasses. And if you want to take all 6 of them, there's a package deal so you can learn all of those leadership differentiators from me directly without having to pay my exorbitant executive coaching fees. All right? So I put all of that out there for you guys. If you have any questions for me about this webinar or any other topics, please find me on social media. Send me an email. I'm very, very easy to find. find me, send me an email, connect with me, and I would very much love to help you out in whatever area of your life you're struggling in, or you just want a little bit of advice in. No problem at all. I am here to improve the quality of your life. I hope that I've done that over these last 75 minutes, because none of us are going to get these 75 minutes back. And if I haven't improved the quality of your life, then what have you been doing here, right? Again, any questions or comments, you can send them to me. Please reach out to me, and please also connect with me on social media, because I've got a lot of free resources there for you. They are absolutely free. And you go ahead, and every day I'm going to give you probably some new thought or some new idea that is going to improve the quality of your life, the trajectory of your career, and your own leadership development, because that's my passion. That's why I get up in the morning, and that's what makes my work life meaningful. All right. Thank you so much for being with me today. I've really appreciated this. It's been a great opportunity for me to discuss the book and what I think are the 6 major differentiators between high quality leaders and low quality leaders in terms of their behavior. I look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar or program or series. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.